Welcome back, everybody, to your daily update on the state of the Malazan Empire. And yes, it is the Malazan Empire because I'm here to talk The God is Not Willing to You. I got the audiobook this morning. I've just finished part one. This is what we're going to talk about. I'm excited. I'm enjoying it so far. So let's get into it and just, do the official, spoiler thing. I'll try to keep it as spoiler free as possible when it comes to non-God is not willing stuff. I'm gonna, say, yeah, this, connects to something in Malazan Book of the Fallen or novels of the Malazan Empire or so, but I'm not gonna go into details, which is easy for part one. Just saying. It'll be more interesting later on, I guess. But yeah, I'm also, I've just finished part one, so no spoilers beyond part one. However, there's going to be spoilers for part one, obviously, otherwise I couldn't really talk about it. So, I don't know. Let's go, right? Cheers. So, first impressions. I know that like other people like Iskar Jarak have said it's very much a best of both worlds where you have like Erickson's like deep themes and whatnot, but also a lot more action as some people think you find in the novels of the Malazan Empire, which obviously doesn't say that those haven't got enough like deep themes and whatnot either, but anyway, so far, I would say it reads very much like just your average Erickson, just with as a combination, I would say almost of Forge of Darkness and Malazan Book of the Fallen, by which I mean we have a much smaller cast of characters so far. Although to be fair, like when we look at like Gardens of the Moon, that also didn't have a large cast of characters, at least at the beginning. So it may expand later on, and I'm just not aware of it yet. But the point is, so far we have a small cast of characters, but we have a lot of the banter, Marines being Marinesy kind of thing going on there, that we know from the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So we have like yes, I could say the focus kind of thing we know from Forge of Darkness, but we have it put into like the frames of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, which I enjoy so far. Um, it feels kind of weird to come back to the Malazan world in a way because I just finished Malazan Book of the Fallen, so I kind of left it behind. And now we're back there, and I feel there's going to be some interesting aspects to that here as well in a minute that I want to go to. But let's first look at like what is like typical Erickson here so far. Themes. The themes are still the ones that are I think are important to Steven Eriksson's writing, whether it's Forge of Darkness or the Malazan Book of the Fallen, or I guess even Rejoice and Willful Child are like once again here at work here as well. So we have like right at the beginning in the prologue, we already have like once again the idea of like ecological change, environmental change that can be man-made or not, with the ice melting and everything. That like coming climate change basically with all its consequences, and we'll see a lot of that during the first book of The God is Not Willing, with all these tribes being on the march, and it's something that we as humans have to face, or already kind of facing, will be facing much more in the coming decades. The idea that changing climate will lead to migration, with all the problems that migration, or forced migration in a way, can have. So that whole idea of like environmental change is there again, as is the idea of like human damage to the environment, with of all people Damask's part, where we talk about how humans, hunt, overhunt, and civilization spreads and pushes back nature, which impoverishes the environment in a lot of ways. We have that once again. It's once again one of the themes that show up with Steven Erikson in Forge of Darkness, and they show up in the Malazan Book of the Fallen heavily. So it's once again one of those themes that are heavy with like a typical Malazan. So we get that again, and I'm glad for it because yes, it's an important thing right now to accept the human influence on the environment and all the damage we as people as a species cause. So there's that. Another one that is obviously important, and we'll see that again, especially now with Rand, the character Rand, is once again the idea of like damage or like trauma from childhood, or the importance of childhood to our characters and all the damage that a difficult childhood can leave, can do to like permanent damage in a way. So we see that again. Once again, one of those themes that show up all over the Malazan Book of the Fallen and the Malazan world. Once again, I mean, it makes sense. Those are like real concerns that we as people should have or have. So I get that. And yeah, it's there. Cool. I felt like so far it was only like a part of it. Well, not too much. Just because of like Rand's very unique circumstances there. Um, a new theme that I found here, and that's something that I find very interesting and will be keeping an eye on for the nearish future, which I mean like tomorrow until I finish the book. And that is like history in a way, or maybe not history, but the idea of how the events of the Malazan Book of the Fallen, how people deal with the aftermath of truly epic events. Now, there's not a lot been said so far about the actual end of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Maybe later on, I don't know. So far, not. But the question of like, if you are the generation that comes after a truly heroic generation, like how do you deal with that? How do you basically start with a more like human scale? Because let's face it, the end of the Malazan Book of the Fallen is very much superhuman in scale when you look at all the stuff that happens there. Um, so we see those people that claim that all the nothing is as huge and as epic or as good as it was back in the old days, or whatever you want to call it, which is then contrasted by someone like Spindle, for whom all of this is just like nothing really changes, just the faces and names of the Marines and stuff, but the actual life of the actual soldier is still the same thing it was back in his old bridge burner days and everything. But no one actually believes that Spindle is an actual bridge burner. So there's that. So yes, that idea of like, how do we live in the shadow of great events? What does that do to our like perception of the world? Is something that I feel weighs heavily on at least parts of the cast of this novel so far. We'll see how that continues, but I think this is like doubly interesting because it's, on the one hand, it kind of raises the question of like, how do we as humans in our world like deal with the recent but overlarge past? Whether it's a good past or a bad past doesn't really actually, you know, make that much of a difference. But the idea of like that the generation of our parents, or like the generation before us, was maybe bigger, better, and whatnot, than everything that we are doing right now, is something that I feel is interesting. But on the other hand, it also is, on the authorial level, a thing, right? It's like, how do you actually continue to tell a story or to tell history? Because, I've said it before that like Malazan stuff is very much a historiography in a way. It's like, how do you continue writing a story or as an author after you like have done this whole epic finale of the crippled god, and you're like, how do you actually pick up after that and continue forward? Because when you look at it, what Steven Erikson did in between was go and write Forge of Darkness and Fall of Light, which is a complete like change of pace and a prequel, which makes a lot of sense, and we see that a lot out there, like with other types of media as well. It's like you finish your big epic and then you're like, let's do a prequel, because picking up after a huge climax is kind of difficult. But on the other hand, it's necessary because history doesn't stop with like huge endings. Like, we pick up the pieces, we continue, we muddle on. It's like we've done that after like World War One. We've done it after World War Two. We've done it better or worse after every like huge war and conflagration. It's like life goes on because the universe goes on. And if you see yourself as the chronicler of events on that planet, you can't just say stop. So I feel part of it is also to look at how these things, how you deal with that, like with that accomplishment, how to continue after that I find very interesting and not exactly easy to understand, because I've never done anything huge, so I don't know how that feels. The other thing, obviously, that I really appreciate is the thing that we already see when we compare the Carcanas trilogy to the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And that is how actual events described as history in whatever kind of way you want, told to us. Like historical events, how they turn into myth and ritual and stuff like that. Something that we see here with The God Is Not Willing, with a lot of the new curses and sayings, which reflect things that happen in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. That, whole idea of like calling to the crows, which we already saw in the Malazan Book of the Fallen later on with stuff like the Kundril Burnt Tears. So we see that ongoing like continuation of events fading into the background, being changed in meaning, being assigned meaning, more actually being assigned meaning that they didn't have before because they were just like random events, more or less, being assigned meaning in that ongoing narration of existence. That sort of is what we do in general. So that I feel makes it very like fascinating for me to read this book so far. It's like, because I've read these other books. Of like, the only Malazan book that I haven't read at this point is Fall of Light, and the Beauchelin and Corbel Broach novellas. But apart from that, I've read everything at least once, and my memories of a lot of the Esselman stuff is rather dim. But it's still like, to see how all of that kind of flows together and changes meaning over time is very fascinating to me. Which brings me to another thing, the whole idea of spoilers of other events, which I feel kind of doesn't work for Malazan. Because once again, what we see here is different people telling different aspects of like history. It's more like reading history once again, even though the focus is much, tighter than it was in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's still history, and we know that there is all this stuff happening outside and has happened before, and you have all these like cross references between what Esselman writes and what Steven Erikson writes. And one of the things, like one of the characters where this is like very, very apparent here is the character of Greymane. So we have points where people discuss about what Greymane did in Corel, not Coral, but Corel. And yeah, that may seem a spoiler for an Esselman novel. But on the other hand, when you look at what happens in the Malazan Book of the Fallen, we also only hear of Greymane secondhand. We know he's a hugely important character, a great military commander, and all of that stuff. We know that. We know he went to Corel and something happened there. But we never see a first person or like you know Steven Erikson never writes directly about Greymane. It's only indirectly in memories and rumors and tales. And this continues. And it's on the other side as well. It's like you read novels of the Malazan Empire, there's characters that get mentioned. So while technically those may be considered spoilers, and it's like, yeah, if you've read Stonewielder, it may, make you like nod knowingly when you read about the Marines talking and stuff like that about him. It's like, yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, yeah, you don't need to have read that. It's the same with like if you read like real world history. It's like it will always mention stuff that happens somewhere, and we just don't think about it as spoilers when it's history. It's like, yeah, also Germany lost the war this year. It's like you may be reading something about, I don't know, Indian history in the 1940s and specialize in that, and then suddenly you read about, yeah, also Germany lost the war, and that at that point it's like, yeah, okay, big spoiler, Germany lost the war. But you don't have to read also like European history to come to actually still appreciate that point being made. So I feel if you look at the whole thing more as historiography, the whole meaning of spoilers is kind of falls into the background there, which I think is a good approach to read any of the Malazan related books, no matter which ones. Like you can read them in like almost any order if you just see them as history. So there's that. Now let's have us a bit of a look at different characters and what's going on there. We meet obviously people with connections and stuff. A lot of House of Chains Book 1 references, obviously, including the fact that the Marines originally stationed, that we meet in the first chapter, the Marines are actually stationed at Calvin Crossing, which is that place that Karsa and Torvald Nom crossed during House of Chains Book 1. Also the idea that like everyone knows about Karsa and everyone thinks he's a god at this point. Well, we don't see him. We just like see his influence. And this I think is another big theme here, that the consequences of our actions. It's once again the one that we see with Steven Erikson's writing with Malazan all the time, where you see like how seemingly careless or like thoughtless or like just acts have huge consequences later on. You look at the Malazan Book of the Fallen, you see like the prologue of Memories of Ice. That one action has incredible ramifications later on. Or even House of Chains Book 1, when you see like the idea of freeing someone trapped under a rock. It's like it has huge consequences. And this continues here in a way that I find very fascinating with someone like Karsa Orlong, whom we have known like since House of Chains. Well, actually, technically since Deadhouse Gates, but And after reading that Book 1 of House of Chains, and I've never been a huge or even like a big fan of Karsa Orlong as a character. He's just not my type. But what I like and really appreciate about The God Is Not Willing so far, because we're all hanging out around Silver Lake and everything like that, even while most people there, accept that Karsa Orlong is now a god, we still see all the consequences of his like very, very deplorable, like his horrible actions in House of Chains, like the first part, like when he Delon Thord and what's his name, Bayroth Guild go down into the valley and do all that stuff. And like we see all these perspectives, these outside perspectives that we didn't have at the time because it was told from Karsa's, perspective in House of Chains. And it was abhorrent back then as already, but it's like to see all these other people and see all these consequences that his like like terrible actions had is very interesting, because it once again raises that question of what makes a god, or what makes a, what makes a god basically. And can someone who does all the terrible stuff that Karsa does, can they become a god? And if so, what kind of god does that make them, in a way? That's a question that I guess will not be answered anytime soon. But I just appreciate the fact that we see someone like Rand, and like, yeah, what Karsa did to Rand's mother was terrible, and you have all these other things in there. And like, one that I really loved is the fact when they're talking about, when the Marines are talking about, the heavies are talking about, and it's like the idiot attack, which, yeah, Karsa, Bayroth, and Delim attacking Silver Lake was like one of the dumbest things ever, and had huge ramification later on. But like, that they still call it the idiot attack is just like, I found like glorious in a way, because it is like disrespectful to someone whom they still acknowledge to be a god. It's just like, yeah, just interesting. I mean, it's sort of like what we would do if we would look at, say, the New Testament, and you look at the Gospels and see what, like, Jesus Christ does when he goes into the temple in Jerusalem and kicks out all the moneylenders, which, on a political level was a really dumb thing to do. I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with him, because, like, yeah, fuck capitalism. I get that. But it's still like, yeah, it was something of an idiot attack. But we don't say that about our gods, or, like, in our world nowadays. So I found that, like, fascinating and refreshing in a way, to be aware of, like, people that have ascended, that they still were people. And yeah, that's something that I found, like, interesting and funny. Now let's have a look at Marines. There's a lot of Marines happening this time round. Like, almost everything that is not Rand Damask is Marines. There's a whole crop of new Marines that are just like the old Marines, only slightly different. And I absolutely enjoy their banter. It's once again a lot of fun. It's one of the things, like, one of the absolute strengths of Steven Erikson is all the humor he manages to push into, like, Marine banter. It's glorious, and it has all of it. Like, it has the really dumb slapstick kind of feces-based humor with Blanket, like, and the fart jokes and everything. Like, holy shit! But then you still have at the same time those two heavies, Blanket, and I keep forgetting his name, Folibor, I think. Those two are, like, having these, like, extremely philosophically deep discussions, which you don't expect from heavies. Um, Especially after the way the heavies were presented in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. It's like Steven Erikson just goes and just, subverts his own tropes, the ones that he made up, cliches that he made up for for the Malazan Book of the Fallen. He just goes and, like, changes them. No, heavies could also be just, like, very, very smart, and actually have sophisticated discussions. Whether they make a lot of sense, like, content wise, isn't the point, but, like, them heavies use, like, really complicated words all of a sudden, and that's just, like, refreshing and funny. Also, Captain Gruff, I feel, is a really cool character so far. I mean, we haven't seen much of it, but the fact that he is, like, presented in a way that you could, if you had, like, really, homophobic or transphobic ideals, you could see as, like, he's, like, presented in that kind of way, but he's at the same time a respected commander. That's the point. It's like, to normalize these kind of things, that the, like, behaviors or appearances that have, like, long been unacceptable for a lot of people for all the wrong reasons, obviously. Especially in some place like the military, which the Malazan Empire, the Malazan armies and the Malazan Marines still are, I feel is very important. I mean, obviously, we still have, like, kind of gender parity with like the Marines, sort of the soldiers, but to also include now characters that very much fall outside their stereotypical gender roles even more. I feel is a very important aspect to just keep fantasy going, especially with like a fantasy like the Malazan world that is so close to our own world in a lot of ways. When you look at behaviors that people show in the armies, like they're obviously like turned up to 11, but still they're like very everyday average like reactions that people in our world would have as well. So I found that, like, especially with Captain Gruff, plus obviously the great name, really cool. Plus, Stillwater is a fascinating character. Is a very fun character. In a lot of ways, I'm not sure if I really like her, but it's certainly entertaining to read her. Plus, all the like jokes she makes without actually getting them, or maybe getting them, which we'll see in the future. It's just glorious. It's like when they play around with that huge spyglass or telescope almost. and, and she's like, you had, if someone would walk with you, you would have a shoulder to scry on. Was just like glorious. I'm sorry, it's the kind of jokes I like very much. So there's that, and I really enjoy that part of the Marine stuff. We'll see where this is going. It obviously takes a while, to get to know all the different characters and see all the stuff that's in there. Is sort of. We'll see where that is going in the next book, which I'll obviously start immediately after recording this video. So yeah, there's that. Marines are going to Silver Lake. We're coming back to the point where Karsa's story starts, and where obviously that whole mess started by climate change, if you want to call it that way, even though it's partly like magically based, like magical climate change with Ontos Felak dying and stuff like that. But it's like, this is where the shit will hit the fan really soon. And I assume Blanket will be standing right there in the thick of it. The shit that is. But yeah, we also have that like prologue that I kind of glossed over, where we have the Teblor realizing the whole like threat of the ice wall breaking and then like everything being flooded. We have the connection with these different like clans. We have see that Dalis, widowed Dalis, mother of Bayroth Guild's son, is with them. We have one of the people of the Rathi that I can't remember that bit, but if there's like one point where that new Teblor Ward Eater was actually, is he in House of Chains, like actually as a person, or just someone we assume was there? Because I'm no longer sure. I thought like one situation where they kill all the guys, all these the Rathid clan, that the hunters basically they kill everyone and no one gets away. But maybe there was that point in the village where maybe there was like a boy or something. I don't know. Still, pretty fascinating. Now let's have a look at Rand and Damask. First of all, I really appreciate Damask, who was kind of an asshole in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. Now we actually get his perspective and see the kind of person he is, like acknowledging the fact that he did a lot of awful stuff, a lot of shit that wasn't cool. But kind of growing older, like at least starting on that whole idea of redemption. And that was like this whole like long discussion on redemption, and redemption being the one thing that everyone wants in their life, and that he talks about with Rand, I think, or is it still when he's like just watching the caribou swimming the lake? I don't know. He's got a point there. Like we all make a fuck ton of mistakes in our lives. Some of them grimmer, some of them less grim. Obviously, as a soldier and tracker for slavers, you have a lot more opportunities to make fucked up mistakes. As someone who just goes to college and then works as an accountant, your chances are slightly better to not fuck up that badly. But we all make mistakes. We all feel bad about it, and redemption is exactly what we wish for all our mistakes. I feel like it's like I gotta make up for all the bad shit I did, which you have that whole idea of karma that Damask kind of puts out there with like souls coming back again and again, and like blessings and curses in a way they're like stacking up, which is like a powerful notion, that idea of karma, in a way that I just spoke about with Iskar Jarek in like a different aspect. It's like exactly that. It's like, we make up notions of karma and karmic justice to account for the fact that just one earthly existence for every person would not leave us with a even slightly just universe. So yeah, having that idea of karma in there makes a lot of sense. Now we have Rand, who is obviously that character with the terrible childhood, and the thing that I feel important about Rand is how unaware he is of all these things, and it takes him until the end of book one to actually, start actually getting some awareness. The question obviously is always like, is it good to force people out of their state of unawareness? Now, obviously, we see that he wasn't happy in his state of ignorance. He was already like thought, and that's, I guess, an interesting aspect, though, because even though he may be a child in mind, children are extremely aware of outside circumstances, and they understand far more than we give them credit for most of the time. And that's the same with Rand. He maybe doesn't like understand the consequences, but he has a keen awareness of like injustices and stuff like that. So Damask saving him from the lake, and then both of them going into the forest so he can go to the Teblor and maybe have a better life there, is really a cool plot for me. It's like to follow like Damask on his attempt at redemption, just being an ordinary person, and Rand trying to figure out the world in a way. Plus, we see that thing that I started talking about, the idea that environmental changes on that level bring suffering when you have these living Imas, apparently, living Imas, hunting down that other tribe and killing them because they're fleeing the water, like the coming flood, and you have the Jack also following that, and you see that, like, yeah, that's just like forces of nature basically that will lead to these results. And then you also get more of the Jack, whom we only see in Midnight Tide so far. And I wasn't aware that because I'm not good with maps, I'm like, is there like a land bridge between, or ice bridge in this case, between Genebakis and Letheras, somewhere with like the whole Ontos Felak part? Maybe, I don't know. Also, why are there like still living Imas around? Interesting. But to see that even those like living Imas still go and hunt Jack just for like that whole like dumb rite of passage kind of thing, which we spoke about before, like the idea of hunting in general being about like a having degenerated to something of a ritualistic thing. And obviously it's kind of changed with the Jack being more than able to defend themselves against the Imas, but it's just the sheer fucking stupidity which we see when Damask is talking to that maybe Jack, or maybe Goddess, maybe the good old war bitch, which may just be the remainder of Vandere. I don't know, could be. And she's like, it's so damn stupid to just go and kill a Jack to prove that you're brave and shit like that. And it's done for both sides, right? The Jack suffer from it or and kill a lot of like IMAs, but the IMAs also, they kill some Jack, but a lot of them just never survive that dumb ritual. So questioning the idea of rituals, of rites of passage, and like these ideas of like ritual like violence to mark parts of our lives, and yeah, the sheer stupidity of that is something I feel came across rather powerfully for me in this first part of The God Is Not Willing. All right. So what else was there to talk about? I guess I've missed a lot of stuff. I'm pretty sure I missed a lot of stuff, but maybe it'll come back to me later on. Later on, I don't know. But I guess this is gonna be it for tonight, or not for tonight, but for now, for part one of The God Is Not Willing. It's called Knuckles. Part two is called Star Wheel. I'm wondering what part three will be called. Because I have this suspicion, because those two are names that certain tiles were given by Featherwitch in Dust of Dreams. That's interesting, I feel. It might be important. Anyway, that's it for now. I'll talk to you later about more God Is Not Willing. Until then, have a great time, and cheers.